And I know that last week I had to miss. I was kind of under the weather. But before that, I made a statement that said that we're going to sort of get some fundamentals about the Bible, what it is. And I want to cover a lot of things out of the Old Testament, New Testament. It's going to take several weeks to go through this. And if you'll stay with me, I'm sure you're going to have a better understanding of what the Bible is all about. And of course, the Bible it contains 66 books. And it was written by more than 40 authors over a period of like 1,500 years. It's divided into two major sections, which is the Old Testament, the New Testament. And of course, we're going to start off with the Old Testament. Both of these books, the Old and the New, they make up one large story that centers around humanity's problem. And from the first part of the Word of God to the last part of the Word of God, it covers humanity's problem. And what humanity's problem is sin, plain and simple. And it also covers God's solution to the problem, sin. Of course, He sent His Son to rescue humanity from this problem. So we're going to start off with the first book tonight, and which is the book of Genesis. And there could be a lot of you people know exactly what I'm talking about, but I want to speak to the people that don't really understand, because you've got to understand this. In the first week I started this, I read a certain parable out of Matthew that Jesus was speaking about the parable. And it talked about the sower sowing the seed, which the seed was the Word of God. And the sower would sow the seed, which when you get into full aspect of it, the sower is me or any other teacher or preacher that expounds on the Word of God, an exhorter of the Word of God. And we sow that Word, and it says specifically in there, those that don't understand, that then the enemy comes and snatches it right away from them because they didn't understand. And when you begin to get an understanding of the Word of God, then that seed can begin to grow, to multiply, begin to bring forth a lot of fruit in your life. Okay? Now, I said the first book in here is called Genesis, and several translations of it, but one that they all mean particularly one thing. Genesis, when it's translated, means the beginning. And we know verse 1 starts out saying, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. And, but some topics that Genesis covers, I want to give you an idea of some things that it covers. It covers the creation. It covers the creation of the universe, the creation of mankind and the animals, the air we breathe, the water, the land that has come. It all covers these things. It covers the creation of man and Adam, and the creation of woman, Eve. It shows both of them over in Genesis chapter 3, I believe it is. And it begins to talk about the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And then it goes on down through there. It talks about the flood that came upon the earth because of how evil mankind had got upon the face of the earth, which is in Genesis 6 through 9, I believe it is, refers to it. Talks about something a lot of people have not heard about called the Tower of Babel, which is real important in the Word of God. Talks about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The covenant with Abraham. Abraham told to sacrifice Isaac, I think, over in 22 of Genesis. Then it comes along, talks about Jacob, different things like that. We're going to cover all of these things. But the beginning, what was some of the beginnings of Genesis? Number one, it was the beginning of the creation. Number two, it was the beginning of mankind. And not only that, it was the beginning of the fall of mankind. For those that are listening that don't know, you know that God created Adam and Eve, put them in the middle of what they call the Garden of Eden. And in the middle of the Garden of Eden was a tree. And that tree had a name. God specifically named that tree. You can go read about it. It was called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God told Adam and Eve, said, you can eat of anything in this garden. Any fruit of any tree, anything you want. But of the tree, of the fruit of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he told them, he said, don't eat of it. He said, because if you do, he said, you will surely die. Now, when you read in there, you see that they ate of that tree, but the problem was they didn't immediately die. Because Satan used that against them, telling them, excuse me, I'm going to have to have a cough drop. But Satan told them, said, you go ahead and eat of this tree, surely you won't die. And he also told them this. He said, you'll be just like God. So they partook of the tree. And here is what happened, okay? The best way to explain it is like this. You take an infant baby, which we had a couple just had a baby this week here in the church. I mean, they didn't have it in the church, but they had a baby. And that baby right now is totally innocent. And even up to a certain age, that baby's going to be totally innocent. It's not going to know evil. It's not going to know wickedness. It's not going to know how to create evil. So it's in a stage of innocence. And that's where Adam and Eve was. They were in a stage of total innocence. They knew no evil. All they knew was good. And just like that young baby gets to a certain age, and they begin to deceive, and they begin to lie, and they begin to lose their temper and throw tantrums and all these things, it begins to get the knowledge of being mean. Okay? So Adam and Eve was in the age of innocence. They partook of the fruit. Boom. Now they knew how to be evil. It came upon them. But even doing this, when they fell, God came down to them, punished them for it, put them out of the garden completely. But at the same time, in Genesis 3 and 15, God made a covenant with man right then. He told Adam, because what you've done, you're going to have to get out of the garden. I'm not going to feed you any longer. You get out of the garden, and you're going to earn a living by the sweat of your brow. So all you guys that get up and go to work every day, thank Adam for that. He looked at the woman, and he said, because of what you've done, you're going to be in great pain and sorrow in childbirth. So you ladies can thank Eve for that, okay? But nevertheless, he put them out of the garden. And he told them, though, he said, I'm going to make a way for mankind to come back to me. So he looked at Satan, and he said, you're cursed. You're going to eat dust the rest of your life. And not only that, he said, the woman's seed, you might bruise his heel, but he's going to bruise your head. So, so what he was talking about was the coming of Jesus Christ. That was the seed he was talking about. It also, Adam and Eve had children. Cain and Abel, Seth, different ones. They had several children. Matter of fact, they had a lot of children over a period of time. But this was the beginning of jealousy. Entered into mankind. Cain and Abel. Cain was jealous of Abel. So not only that was the beginning and the first murder in Genesis chapter 4 occurred in the book of Genesis. And he rose up out of jealousy, killed his brother, murder started, sin was just coming right on and on. Wickedness began to prevail all over the earth. Several hundred years road until it come down to the time of Noah. You read about this over in Genesis chapter 6 through 9. The time of Noah came upon the earth. The earth, everybody on the face of the earth was wicked. That's all they knew was wickedness, except for Noah and his family. And so God come and spoke to Noah, I bring a judgment upon the earth. And told him, you build me an ark. So Noah began to build the ark, and he preached for 120 years that judgment was coming. Of course, everybody laughed him to shame and talked about him and different things to that nature. But you can read about the flood over in Genesis chapter 6. It also began the diversity of languages upon the earth. That's what I mean. Genesis is so full of things that happened that is actually even going on today. Okay? The beginning of diversity of languages over in the 11th chapter of Genesis, you read about the Tower of Babel. And all mankind at that time spoke one language. They were all of one language. They got together. They built a big city. They began to build a tower. They said, we're going to build a tower into heaven. So God said, I'm going to go down and see what man is conceived in his heart to do. So God came down and looked and saw what they were doing. And the Bible said that he confounded their languages. To one man couldn't understand what the other man was saying. There were certain groups that could understand each other. Other ones, they couldn't. So it said they left off of building the tower, building the city, and they all scattered and went all to other parts of the earth. Okay? Now, Genesis also covers something really interesting. There was a certain particular man by the name of Abraham, had a wife by the name of Sarah. This is the first covenant that God actually made with mankind. He made it with Abraham. And he told Abraham, he said, by your seed, the whole world is going to be blessed. And of course, Christ is called the seed of Abraham. Okay? So the lineage goes all the way down. You'll find out that Christ actually came from the lineage. But listen to this. What I want to get into to get you to understand tonight is this. It was the beginning of the Jewish covenant. It was the beginning of the Jewish people. Let me put it that way. It was the beginning of the Jewish people by covenant. Okay? And we know that when you read in the Bible, you'll find out that over in Genesis 12, I think it is, that Abraham was up around 100 years old, close to it. His wife was too, Sarah. God finally came down. They were barren. They had no children. But God kept telling Abraham, through you, the whole world is going to be blessed. Through your seed, the world is going to be blessed. So, Abraham was around 100 years old. And he was told this promise, and he kept, 100 years old, okay? So, finally at a ripe old age, Sarah conceived. But before this happened, Sarah kept telling Abraham, where's the seed that God's promised us? And then Sarah came up with a plan. She had a handmaiden by the name of Hagar. And Sarah come up with a plan and said, Abraham, I know God has promised us a child that's going to be the blessing to all the world. So maybe it is that you are to have a child by my handmaid, Hagar. So she told Abraham, go into Hagar. Abraham went into Hagar, and she conceived, and she had a son. and they named him Ishmael. Okay? Now, these individuals are very important down through history. And you're going to find out here in a little bit why that they're so important. Now, so there was Ishmael, young boy. Abraham loved him to death. And then, right after that, Sarah, 98 years old, she conceived. And she gave birth to Isaac. Now, when you read in the New Testament, especially some of Paul's writings, you'll read about being freeborn and being slave-born. Sarah was a slave. Ishmael was slave-born. Isaac was freeborn. And here's what it is. In the biblical times, the father would pass all his blessing off onto the son, the first son. So people would think, well, why isn't Ishmael going to get the blessing? Well, the reason being is he wasn't freeborn. He was slave-born to Sarah, or to Hagar. So after Isaac was born, Sarah kind of got a little jealous of Ishmael. So she told Abraham, said, you tell Hagar to take Ishmael and get out here. I don't want her around here anymore. Don't want that boy around here anymore, more or less. So Abraham blessed him, gave him good stuff, and told him to go. So Hagar left with Ishmael, and they went out into a desert place. And she put the young child down, and she went over and sat in another place, because she didn't want to watch him die, because they had no water, no food. An angel came to her and told her, said, Hagar, you go back to that child. Said, because out of his loins a great nation is going to be born. Okay? Keep that in mind. A great nation out of Ishmael is going to be born. But he was a slave born to Abraham. So, the freeborn son, Isaac, was the one that the blessing fell on. Now, this is going to start giving you a perspective of where the Jewish people come from. Now listen to this. And where the Muslim people come from. Okay? A lot of you people are going to disagree with me and may even throw rocks at me. That's okay. But ever since man has been on the face of the earth, we've been at war with each other. And when you read about the past wars that Israel has had, and I can remember as a young man listening to the news, and they would talk about the Holy War. The Holy War. And I never could figure it out. But let me tell you something. You wonder why that the Muslims hate the Jewish people so bad. They want to destroy them, and they want the property that they've got, more or less. And the reason is this. Ishmael, from his lineage, is where the Muslim nation came from, or that people came from. Let me put it that way. They come from the loins of Ishmael. The Jewish people come from the loins of Isaac. Okay? Now, Ishmael is still wanting his birthright that was given to Isaac. But Ishmael was slave-born. Isaac was free-born. So the blessing went to Isaac. And ever since then, ever since then, they have been a holy war. I mean, they've been something going on with them all the time. But anyway, to cover a few more things in Genesis, because I'm just going to skip through all of the books and just give some highlights out of all of them. And the story goes on. Isaac grew up and got married, and he had two sons. One by the name of Jacob, one by the name of Esau. They were twins. Esau was actually born first, then Jacob, and remember, the birthright always went to the oldest son. But Jacob, in the biblical, his name stood for deceiver. So Jacob was a deceiver. And Jacob actually wanted the birthright. His mother actually got in with him, and they kind of deceived Esau, and they deceived their father as well. Okay? That's over in 25th chapter of Genesis. So Esau, the Bible said he was a hunter. He liked staying out in the woods. He hunted. He brought in venison. He brought in game, all this kind of stuff. And the Bible said that Esau was a hairy man, real hairy. Now, his father Isaac was old in years, pretty well blind. He couldn't see. He knew that he didn't have long left, so he wanted to pass the birthright on to someone else. And the mother went and told Jacob, said, when Esau comes in from hunting, your dad is going to give the birthright to Esau. And she said, I want you to have it. So Jacob went out. Listen to this, what he done. He went out and he took wool from sheep or lamb wool or whatever, and he stuck it on his arms and his chest and his face and everywhere. And he made a bowl of, we'll say soup, porridge, it says, out of wild game. And he'd come to his father and brought this porridge, and his father ate it and said something about him being Esau. He said, come here. Jacob walks over, and Isaac feels him, feels how hairy he is. And at that moment, he laid his hand on Jacob's head and passed the blessing over to him. And of course, there was a great division come between these two brothers over that. Like I said, Jacob's name was Esau. Now, here's something to think about, is how that all of the Jewish nation, how did it come about? Well, listen to this. Of course, Jacob grew. He went out. He got married. He had wives. And, of course, Jacob was afraid that Esau was going to kill him, but he didn't. He blessed him. One night, Jacob went into a valley. He was hiding from his brother. He went into a valley by himself. The Bible said that he took a rock and made him a pillow out of it. And that night he began to see a vision. He saw a ladder come down out of heaven. You've heard of Jacob's ladder. So the ladder came down out of heaven. It said angels was ascending and descending upon the ladder. And there was, it said, an angel. Of course, a lot of people believed it was the Lord, which I personally do. And it said he wrestled with him. He grabbed a hold of him. Jacob grabbed a hold of him, and they wrestled to the break of day. And this person looked at Jacob and said, turn me loose. And Jacob said, not until you bless me will I turn you loose. And it said the Lord blessed him. Of course, he smote him in his thigh and caused his muscles to shrink. And he looked at Jacob And he said, listen to this. He said, Jacob, you're not going to be called Jacob any longer. But your name is going to be changed. Over in Genesis 32. It says, your name is going to be changed to Israel. Now, his name was changed from deceiver, Jacob, to Israel, which meant prince with God, or prince of God, okay? Now, listen to this. So, Jacob began having children, and he had 12 sons, all righty? And when you begin to read the Word of God, and you will read, and it will talk about the 12 tribes of Israel. I know you've read it. You'll even read about it over in Hebrews, different places you'll read about it. They're mentioned over in Revelations even, the tribes of Israel. And what it is each one of those boys, right now I can't name them all off the top of my head, but I know Judah was the one that the lineage of Jesus Christ came from. There's Manasseh and Reuben and Gad and Dan and all these other ones. So these boys went out and they got wives and they began to have children, and their children began having children and children having children until they had what we call a clan, okay? And so the tribe of Dan, that was all of the lineage and the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and all of them from the loins of Dan, Gad, Reuben, Manasseh, Judah, Benjamin, all of them. And that is where, when you read in the Bible, it talks about the 12 tribes of Israel, which those were the 12 sons of Jacob, which they were the 12 grandchildren of Isaac. Okay? So this is where the 12 tribes of Israel come from. And it's important to know that, because when you begin reading on through the Old Testament, you will begin reading about certain tribes doing this tribe done this. Of course, Levi, we don't want to forget Levi, because he was the priesthood tribe that was named later, which we're going to get into that in depth on some of this priesthood stuff that came true. Now, there was the 12 tribes of Israel, and you read about them, and they even at one time went to war with each other. Now, when you read in the Bible, I want you to be clear about this. When you read in the Old Testament and you read about the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, what you're reading about is the northern kingdom was still called Israel. The southern kingdom was called Judah. They were separated. They went at war with each other. And of course, they was part of the tribe of Dan was with Judah. So, what it was, about 10 and a half tribes was called the northern kingdom. The other part of them were divided. They were the southern kingdom. So there's a lot of division, a lot of problems with them. And of course, through all of this, you begin reading about, of course, we're going to get into Moses. Definitely going to get into Moses. And because here's something important about Moses and about the rest of these first 5 books that we're going to talk about in depth, is the first 5 books in the Bible, starting with Genesis. The first 5 books are called the book of Moses. Those 5 books are called the book of Moses. Now, why is this important to know? Because when you start reading in the New Testament, especially when the Pharisees and the Sadducees was coming against Jesus Christ on everything he was saying, and And they was said according to the law of Moses, according to the law of Moses. Well, they lived by those first 5 books in your Old Testament. And this was called the law, the Levitical law. And the reason that I want to get into that in depth, I may even start getting into it next week a little bit. We will cover the law of Moses. And the reason being is a lot of the writings of Paul, and not only this, remember this something that Jesus said. He said, I'm not come to destroy the law. When the Pharisees was coming against Jesus, he's talking about, the law. They saying, this man's going against the law of Moses. Jesus said, look, I'm not here to destroy your law. He said, but I have come to fulfill the law. And the law was instituted to get us back to God, to get us into a sort of a righteous state that God could deal with Israel. That's why the law was imputed. Listen to this too. The law was imputed for another reason, and this is what it was. You're reading the Word of God. Paul wrote it, and it says this. It says, where there's no law, there's no transgression. So, if you had no law to govern you, how do you know when you've done wrong? So, the law was instituted that Israel and all mankind at that time could realize that they were sinners. They were lost. They were separated from God. The law was imputed for these things. 10 Commandments was imputed for these things. And Jesus said, I come to fulfill the law. And you'll read a law over there in the writings of Paul, which we will get into when we start talking about the law. We're going to get into some writings of Paul that is almost confusing to a way, but once we get into it and explain it, you're going to understand, even in the New Testament, about the law. What the law could do, and what the law couldn't do, and what Jesus could do, and different things of that nature. But the book of Genesis, when you read it, just begin to understand that this is the beginning of so much. The Jewish people, the history of man, the regeneration of the earth once the flood came, destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is in the book of Genesis. All of these things are in there. And it leads up and begins to come to a point of where the law had to be imputed. And of course the law was given to Moses. And we will begin to cover Moses and things that he done and what they went through and a lot of things like that. Probably starting on it next week. But I'm going to leave you with that tonight. And I want to say this, that appreciate the ones that are watching. And I hope the ones that really haven't grasped anything about Genesis can get a hold of something. But like I said, we're going to go through the Bible. And we're going to go through the books. But I'm going to just hit the highlights of them, just like I've done Genesis tonight. But I want to say this, here at Life Church, we've got a wonderful group of people here, a wonderful praise and worship team, a wonderful pastor, and of course I could brag on the pastor's staff as well, which that would include me. Anyway, we would like to invite you to come 10:30 on Sunday morning, 6 o'clock on Sunday night. Tuesday night, the ladies have have prayer meeting here at 6 o'clock. The men on Wednesday night have prayer meeting here at 7 o'clock. So if you're in the neighborhood, you feel like you need to pray, you stop in, be with us. But we've got a lot of things we're planning for the church. But nevertheless, we do preach the gospel of Jesus Christ here. We do preach the Word of God. And God is blessing us. And we just want to invite you to come and be with us. So until